Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Bullpen. All right, in the Bullpen today, we have Mr. Jon Hartley. He is a writer, economics researcher, and commentator, having been a regular economics contributor for Forbes and the Huffington Post, also writings in the Wall Street Journal and other places. Very accomplished individual. Mr. Hartley, good to have you on the show. How are you?
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to talk about what's happening right now in Congress. Naturally, they have decided to get rid of McCarthy. You have a void of leadership as far as House leadership is concerned. Based on the rules of engagement, certain things cannot happen without having an elected leader, like truly advancing legislation, which is why Congress is in place, right? So they cannot do their constitutional duties here to the degree that they're supposed to. You basically have a representative government that's not representing anybody. And we are looking at another government shutdown, which would mean economic disaster. What do you see happening with Republicans as it relates to their new, hopefully soon to be new elected leader for the House?
Well, the House GOP is coming back, this week after breaking last week. They have a plan to vote on a new speaker on Wednesday. They're having a candidate forum on Tuesday night. It's looking so far like the sort of two leading candidates to be the next House Speaker are Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan, sort of both representing the more sort of traditional sort of fusionist camp on the Scalise side versus the House Freedom Caucus member and arguably sort of more populist Jim Jordan. And you're absolutely right. The stakes are very high in terms of what actually caused the ouster of Kevin McCarthy to begin with. Had a lot to do with Ukraine aid. Saying that in a CR, they managed to get a stopgap funding bill or a continuing resolution passed that only extends things to mid-November. So mid-November is sort of going to be this sort of time. Really, I think a time for choosing whether or not to sort of allow a government shutdown to happen, or to sort of get together and figure out on what exactly are going to be the steps forward. And the stakes are a lot higher now, given the new sort of conflict and new war between Israel and Gaza. It's really important, thinking about now what's the significant issue is, are you going to continue to be able to pay reservists who may be, involved or sort of proximate to the Israeli-Gaza conflict? The U.S. has said they're going to move a carrier strike group to the region. But of course, the aid for Ukraine is a really huge issue. Whether or not to continue supporting financially both sort of reconstruction for Ukraine, as well as to support their efforts to push back Russia, the Russian forces that are currently in Ukraine. But remember, there was a very narrow House GOP win in the last election. It was like 221 Republicans to 212 Dems. It allows people like Representative Matt Gaetz and others to sort of flex their power. Even people like Nancy Mace, who isn't really a populist at all, but arguably more of a centrist, just voting McCarthy out just to show that they have some sort of power. But this is all amidst what seems to be some sort of a realignment, both within the GOP. There's certain factions that are trying to move away from the sort of old Bill Buckley GOP sort of fusionist model, and there's also I think a realignment across both parties. Certainly, a lot of people are sort of against free markets on both sides, against sort of the old Washington consensus. A lot of people trying to build a new Washington consensus. People that are skeptical of trade, like things like tariffs, want things like industrial policy. There's I think a big realignment that's sort of going on in front of us in terms of how we want to think about international affairs.
Let me pose something to you, because you said something to me that's quite interesting and ironic, and I would like you to thoughtfully engage with me about this domestic issue, not just the international one. You said that basically things are even more dire because of the conflict that is happening with Israel and Hamas. And I can be sensitive to that. I can respect the reality of international conflict and how it adversely impacts domestic relations here in America and our interest overseas. But Mr. Hartley, from 1982 to 2022, you have a composite of 19.23 million individuals who work for the federal government. You have millions of people right now who work for the federal government and contract with the federal government, so their livelihood is dependent upon the federal government. And then you have millions of state employees that technically work for the federal government because the grant is subsidized by the federal government, even though they are paid by state agencies. And then you have millions of Department of Education grants. All of these jobs, all of these people, they end up getting no paycheck. The largest employer, the largest singular employer of African Americans in America is the federal government. So while we could talk about it's dire because of the conflict, it was dire because of mama them, because of our domestic American citizens beyond. And I don't know, man, don't you think it's ironic? We live in a country where we will say, okay, the government's going to shut down. Millions of people that live in America are going to be adversely impacted. But this thing that's happening outside of America, that means that we really need to care now about making sure the government doesn't shut down. You don't find that ironic?
Well, I think it was important before. It's even more important now, obviously.
But why is it more important? Isn't it more important to make sure that the government doesn't stop working for the people that make the government work? Who does the money come from? Whatever aid they want to use, we can debate about if the aid should go anywhere. But whatever aid they use, dear brother, that aid doesn't come from them. They don't make a damn thing. That aid comes from us. So they're willing to shut us down, but only willing to say, we're going to make something happen. Now we're going to actually provide leadership now if we got to deal with something outside of America. That attitude, I'm not talking about the principle. I'm talking about the personality behind it. That kind of politic is the reason why people are so adverse to Congress and members of the political class in general. It's as if we are still on the back burner and we're the people that fund the whole operation.
I don't think we disagree. I think it's obviously, I don't think anyone, or at least I'm certainly not in favor of any kind of shutdown. And I think most Republicans also aren't in favor of a shutdown. And again, what I mentioned earlier, it only takes, it's 6 or 7 or 8 votes.
Right.
On the GOP side.
But what about Matt Gaetz? Let me ask you about Matt Gaetz specifically, because he seemed as if he was much more okay with the government shutdown. So much so that Mitch McConnell had to basically oppose what the individual said, what Matt Gaetz said publicly. So why do you think people like Matt Gaetz, why are they leading this charge that seems antithetical to the progress of what we all would consider to be a good thing, people being able to work and get their paycheck?
Sure. Well, I think it's a pretty clear case of political opportunism. It's people putting sort of themselves in their own political career over sort of the broader interests of the people or the movement, the movements that you sort of subscribe to. But how did the CR get passed? Kevin McCarthy got enough votes from Democrats to get stopgap funding passed. It's certainly possible that the next speaker could do something similar to that. It does cause it is a bit of an issue if again these if there's continued issues with being able to actually elect a speaker. But I do think that this is more theatrics than sort of anything that's particularly serious. But it's worth mentioning. Congress has a lot of issues that go, I think, well beyond just these sorts of shutdowns. And usually, when these shutdowns end, furloughed employees get all their back pay and so forth.
Oh, come on, dear brother. Wait a minute, man.
It isn't something that anybody wants. But again, the problem is that Congress doesn't do its job, broadly speaking, and doesn't.
And I agree with you
on a number
on
of
that.
issues, and
I agree with you.
it relies on the administrative state to do a number of things that the Congress should be doing. So I don't think we disagree.
Right.
Government shutdowns are bad, and they should get their act together. So
on that we concur. I don't want to dissuade from the impact of it by saying, those people end up getting their money back or they get their back pay. Well, many of them are still mandated to actually do some work. They're mandated to work in many offices without receiving money. And then you have what's called essential workers who will probably still get paid out of that provisional fund. But the bottom line is, if you miss a paycheck for a month, hell, some people cannot miss a paycheck for 1 week without having significant adverse results happen in their personal life. So I want to be sensitive to that. And we're out of time, but I wanted to pose this to you before you go. Naturally, this could have major economic or adverse economic effect. How do you think that translates? If that happens, if we're not able to get our stuff together, if Congress cannot do so in this country, remember it took 15 rounds of voting before McCarthy got it. If something like that happens, we'll go back into a shutdown and has real consequence in America. Do you think that helps or hurts the Republicans who are trying to gain power again in the executive branch?
I think it hurts. And I think if you look at past shutdowns in general, I think it generally hurts broad Republican electoral prospects in general. Again, I think these are cases of, a few individual congressmen that are, political opportunists trying to put their own individual, political career interests above that of the party, broadly speaking. I think, all the, 221 most of the 221 Republicans who are in the House trying to get reelected next year don't want to have to answer to their constituents for why there was some sort of a government shutdown, even if they were opposed to it, and many and most are. So again, I think politically it's very bad for Republicans who are trying to get reelected next year. For sure.
There you go. All right, before you go, should they remove Matt Gaetz or not?
Well, I don't know if they have the power to. I mean, it's. I think in general,
but they have the authority. You mean they don't have the votes? That's what you mean?
Well, I think in general, I think removing somebody from Congress. I think at least in terms of what the procedure generally is usually under circumstances of fraud, criminality.
Yeah, they say he snorts cocaine and likes to have sex with underage children. So that would be, he's under investigation for that by an ethics committee.
Right, but that's up to the Department of Justice and the courts, and they have to make.
Oh no, the ethics committee can make a determination of that. It's been done before. They can do so without the DOJ.
Sure, but they need evidence, and you have to have committee hearings and so forth. So and all that takes a long period of time, and that can't. I don't think you have enough time between now and. Well,
generally speaking, if it comes out that there's evidence here, there's some there, do you think that Matt Gaetz should be removed?
Well, no, you need to have evidence of these of criminality.
Right, that's what I'm saying. If there's evidence that he did those things presented during committee hearings, do you think at that point they do need to move to have him removed?
Absolutely, I think there should be I think there should be ethics investigations of any case of criminality on the part of members of Congress. Look what's going on with Senator Bob Menendez. A lot of Democrats have rightfully, I think, asked for him to resign. And I think anytime any member.
But should Matt Gaetz be removed?
If there's evidence of criminality, of course. But again, you have to make the case. And you need evidence. It can't just be hearsay or rumors and so forth. So I think that's important.
I think it's more than rumors, sir.
Well, the Department of Justice hasn't indicted him. So
that was unfortunate.
What's going on there?
Yeah, I don't either. That was unfortunate. But let's see if these text messages come back up before that committee. All right, and I'll bring you back on to talk about it then. Okay, but it's always a pleasure, man. Thank you for coming back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.